To define a color in processing, you typically give it three numbers, either red, green, blue, or hue, saturation, and brightness. Typically, you'll end up memorizing half a dozen, maybe even a dozen colors, but more often you're going to want to go to an interactive color picker to find colors that really please you. There are hundreds of color pickers out there, and you can use any color picker that appeals to you. I'm going to show you two. One of them is built into processing itself. The other is my favorite of the color pickers on the web. Here's a blank sketch in processing. I'm not even going to think about the sketch. Instead, I'm going to go up to the Tools menu, and from Tools, I'm going to choose Color Selector. This brings up processing's own built-in, tiny little bare bones color selector. You can choose colors by clicking or dragging in this box where you see all the colors represented. And you can change the hue of the colors that you're playing with by dragging up and down in this hue selector window. You'll notice that no matter what color you pick, black is in the lower left and white is in the upper left. So if I click down here or drag the little box down to the bottom left, you can see that RGB are all 0. If I go up to the upper left, we have white, and RGB are all 255. Okay, that's weird. It turns out that there's a reason why 255 is the largest value that you can put into red, green, or blue. And there's a video on that. If you're not keen on learning the reasons, just boil that into your brain that red, green, and blue run from 0, meaning off, to 255, meaning on. If you want the details, they're there. And they're kind of interesting too. You'll notice that we also have hue, saturation, and brightness values. Those run on different scales. Hue runs to 359 at the top of the scale. This is in degrees, and there are 360 degrees in a circle. So we have 0 degrees at the bottom, all the way up to almost 360 at the top. If it went to 360, that's the same thing as 0. So you choose your hue, and that sets a number from 0 to 359. And saturation and brightness are all a percentage, and so they run from 0 to 99. So if you saturate your color all the way, you get 99% saturation. That's this right-hand edge. And if you crank up the brightness all the way, that's up here, you'll get brightness values that sometimes they actually do pop over into 100. But most of the time you get values from 0 to 99. Finally, at the bottom right corner, you see a bunch of letters following the pound sign. That's called hex or hexadecimal notation. It's a color description used by web designers, and we won't go into that here. Primarily, when you work with colors and processing, you either work in RGB or HSB. So this certainly does the trick, and you can pick a color quick and dirty and get it up there with processing's own built-in color selector, and it's always right there. There are so many other tools, though. Let me show you my favorite. This is a free website from Adobe. It's called Cooler, and it's spelled Kuler. Here's the URL, cooler.adobe.com. If you ever forget that, just type Cooler into any search engine. I've got a bookmark for this because I go there so often. Now, there's a million things that you can do on Cooler, and if you enjoy color, this is a great playground where you can mess around with all kinds of things. I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to show you the bare bones stuff right now. When you start Cooler, it typically gives you a default color scheme that has been recently submitted by another user. So here we have something with some browns and grays and greens. I'm going to pick one of the other schemes just because I want something a little bit more colorful for this demonstration. And we can pick any of the colors in this column. And if we want other columns, we can click on these little arrows down here. And you can see that right now, users have contributed 10,529 different color schemes. So you can certainly browse them all. I'm going to pick this one right here because it's nice and colorful. So I just click on that, and those are the colors that activate at the top of the screen. Now, if you just want those, that's fine. If you want to mess around with them, you can. The way you adjust the colors and see their values is with this button right here. This is meant to remind you of 3 little sliders. When we click on the sliders, Cooler takes us to a whole new world. And there are so many things you can do in here. You can design sets of colors according to color theory rules. You can work with colors from other people. There's a million things you can do. But let's stick to the basics. There are 5 colors here, and you can adjust each one independently, or you can adjust them all at once if you're working with a color theory rule. Let's work with each one independently. So I'm going to click this second one over from the left. Now there are a few things that I can do to adjust the color. One is I can change the 3 sliders that are immediately underneath it. And I can just click and drag these sliders, and the color will adjust as I move them around. Now look at the circle at the top of the screen. And notice as I drag the sliders around, there's a little dot moving around inside the circle. And there's a little slider underneath that circle that also moves when I move these sliders around. So that might suggest to you that's another way of controlling these colors, and indeed it is. I'll click on this dot and move it around. You'll notice that the color square is changing. And I can change its brightness by using the little slider that's underneath the color wheel. So let's look again at the 3 sliders that are immediately underneath the square. What are they controlling? Well, if you look at the lines that are underneath each box, you'll see that there are 5 lines, and each line has a bunch of numbers. The first line reads HSV. That stands for hue saturation value, and we can think of that as hue saturation brightness, just like we would use in processing. The next line is RGB, again, just like we would use in processing. And there are several more lines that we won't focus on right now. So let's set the sliders up to run RGB. So I'm going to click on RGB. Now, if we look at the 3 sliders, they don't look like they're showing us RGB. This is Cooler trying to be helpful. If I drag all the sliders down to 0, you'll notice that the colors of the sliders become R, G, and B. The sliders are showing us what will happen to the color as we drag them around. You may recall that I said red, green, blue was a difficult system to work in. It is. And so they try to use the sliders to help you out. So I'll tell you what, let me push up the green to some high level. You'll notice that the red slider or the topmost slider is now showing us if we move it to the right, we'll push the color towards yellow. So that's still controlling how much red there is, but it's showing us the effect of moving that slider around. So in fact, if I do move it up to here, we now know that means this color has equal amounts of red and green in it. So it's kind of a yellow ochre color. And if we bring the blue slider, we know in our heads that this is blue, up, we get a gray because red, green, and blue have equal values here. So suppose that we make the green and the blue fully on and we make the red fully off. We get cyan. And as we add more and more red to the cyan, we get something closer to white. So if you like messing around with red, green, blue, choose RGB, and then these sliders are sort of giving you a clue as to what will happen if you change them. HSV is much easier to use. Click on HSV and you'll notice that the top slider is now the hue slider. And again, it goes from 0 to, he actually goes to 360. So if we come down from the left, we go to 0. If we go all the way out to the right, we get 360. And in between, we get all the hues. And notice as I run this thing from the left to the right that the dot at the top of the screen runs around the color wheel, just as we would expect. And beneath hue is saturation. Desaturated, we get a shade of gray. Fully saturated, we get the vivid color. And brightness, which they think of as value. All the way at the right, it's fully up. All the way to the left, we have black. So you can choose to affect all the colors one by one, just click each one or drag its dot around and mess around until you have 5 colors you like. And I do want to mention these rules. If you click select a rule, or if you click one of these options under select a rule, the colors all get locked together. And now you're forced to pick colors that work together according to color theory rules. So for example, I'm going to click triad. And you'll notice that the dots are all forming 120-degree angles with each other. And if I drag any one dot, all the other dots are updating. So I don't have total freedom over the colors. It's forcing me into certain patterns that the color theory rule determines. And there's a bunch of these rules. And if it's ever driving you crazy and you think, oh no, I want to adjust my colors all by myself, pick custom. And once you have custom, it says, oh, I'm not going to enforce any rules. You can do whatever you want. And you can drag the colors around freely. Once you have a color you like, just read off the RGB values or the HSV values. Think of the HSV as HSB. And use those values in processing.